We hit the beach. We ran into a couple snipers. The dive bombers were dropping their bombs on the point, and we heard some machine gun fire, and I was a squad leader at the time. I think this might be the real thing. We were beginning to think that, I said, yeah. So that's about the time I thought that this was it. I hadn't really seen any action up until that time. Now we knew we were in a battle.
Today, we'll hear from Captain Frank Guidone. Guidone served in World War II with the Marine Raiders, a special ops force that specialized in amphibious guerrilla warfare. In this interview, he recounts his service in the Solomon Islands, including the Battle of Edson's Ridge.
I joined the Raiders in Quantico in 1941. Previous to that, I was with the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, and I joined them down in Cuba during maneuvers. We later moved to Quantico as 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. The rest of the division was down at New River, North Carolina. Then things happened that somebody got the idea of having something similar to the commandos. It was all a higher echelon. And before you knew it, we became the 1st Separate Battalion. Then we started working with rubber boats, long hikes, and weapons education. And finally, it melted down to the 1st Raider Battalion. And our mission was probably going to be to prepare the beaches, make reconnaissance for a later landing by bigger units and stronger units. And that's where I started with the Raiders. Our training highlighted physical conditioning first, and we got a lot of hand-to-hand combat instructions, and we rehearsed getting out of the APDs underway into a rubber boat and then paddling towards shore, and those kind of things all up and down the Atlantic coast. But I think we may have had more spirit as Raiders, and we felt we were a little different than the regular infantry battalions. But I know the regular infantry battalions, I've talked to men that said the only thing we had was the Raider name. We were all the same, and I agree with that. We left Quantico and ended up in Samoa, where we got into some deep training there, and it was probably our first time that we became aware of kind of jungle warfare, because it got thick there in some parts of Samoa, and the heat, and the physical training. And it was good training, and we finally really thought we were becoming a very cohesive unit. And from there we went to New Caledonia, which was a different climate, a nice climate, and we were able to refine a lot of our shooting and hiking and conditioning.
Finally, after practice landings on Fiji, Frank's Raider unit learned where they would first face the enemy: the island of Tulagi, a tiny Japanese-held territory just 20 miles off Guadalcanal.
We hit the beach and had to wade in a little ways, but we hadn't seen an enemy. On the way up, working toward the middle of the island, we ran into a couple snipers. Then we did a right wheel and put the whole battalion line, and we moved in to hit the south part of the island, where we thought the Japanese, where we were in a skirmish line moving up. The dive bombers were dropping their bombs on the point, and we heard some machine gun fire, and I was a squad leader at the time. I think this might be the real thing. We were beginning to think that, I said, yeah. So that's about the time I thought that this was it. I hadn't really seen any action up until that time. So when we moved up to a top of a ridge, and we rested on the slope of the ridge, we got our packs and gears squared away, because word was that we were going to go up to the top of the ridge and then charge down the ridge toward the enemy. Supposedly, we knew they were down there now. So when I got up there with my squad, and we got the word to move out, we started down this slope, which was bare, and it was about 50 yards. And we ran down there, in a line, and I got to the bottom of the hill and found out that two of my men were missing. And later they had been killed running down the ridge. And that was my indoctrination, really. Now we knew we were in a battle. And we were the only squad that got down to that low ground. The other two squads on our left and right had pulled back.
Guidone's squad and the rest of their company now found themselves at the foot of Hill 280, which rose above the southeastern tip of the island. Though outnumbered, the Japanese defenders had dug caves and machine gun nests to turn the hill into a fortress.
So we were down at the bottom of the hill, and we knew that the Japs were just ahead of us, like about 50 yards. We'd see them darting back and forth from shoulder to shoulder. We made our way to a red tin shack. No good thing, we all got behind that shack, and that was our shelter for a while. And every time we'd peep out from the side of the shack, the Japanese would fire on us. So we were just about frozen in that position till about dusk. And we made our way back up to the top of the ridge where the battalion was still formed. And I reported to the company commander. He sent a platoon leader up to a part of the line that needed filled in. And I put my squad into this gap. And it was too late to dig in, so we just threw our packs down and put our rifles on top. I passed the word to not do any firing or making no noise and keeping quiet because we were expecting Japanese attack. And just as it got dark, down below and behind the ridge, there had been a fire, a burning building, and it lit up the skyline on the ridge. And we noticed some movement on the ridge line. We kept looking, we couldn't believe it. It looked like it was some alligators or lizards, moving. And they were coming over the ridge, and then we heard the voices. So now, we knew. So that's when we started throwing hand grenades. And they kept coming, and they kept moaning and groaning, and every time we'd hear a groan, we'd throw a grenade that way. We weren't using a rifle fire because it would have been ineffective. And that fight went on all night long, and they just kept coming, and we kept throwing. The squad was great. They were well disciplined as to no firing, and we kept going. We went back to CP, which was about 20 yards behind us, to get more grenades, and we threw them all night long. And the next morning, before we could see what we had done, there had been two attacks, one to our right against C Company, and this one against us, against my squad, really. And we had about 25 to 30 enemy that were piled up in front of us. And they weren't 20 yards away from us, but they were just like they'd been chopped up with a meat grinder. And that night, we knew now we were in combat. And the next morning, I saw some of our friends and buddies, under ponchos, and we realized then that this was going to be a long haul. And now we started digging battle lines, foxholes, stringing barbed wire, because we thought, sure, we were going to have, a landing against us. And the morale was pretty bad at that time because all the ships were gone and all kind of rumors were floating around. And from then on, it was just a matter of digging the Japanese out of the caves. There was no more of the line-to-line fighting. It was all caves and grenades. And then the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines came up and helped us push all the way to the end of the island, and we secured it. Then from then on, like we were in a defensive position, and there was one day that the Japanese submarine came up right in the bay where we were. Everybody saw them. And they thought that the Japanese still had control of the island. And they fired a couple shots from their 3-inch gun on the sub, and we had a couple mortars, and they fired back. And then I guess the sailors figured out that we better get down below. And so that was the exciting part of that. And that was it for Tulagi. We thought we had done our job, We didn't know until we went over to Guadalcanal, and I'll never forget, we had a word that the battalion commander wanted to talk to us. He was talking to each company. The rumor had gotten around it, we had done our part of the war. We were ready to get out of here. And that I remember Colonel Edson came up in a Jeep with his staff, and and he started talking about what a good job we had done on Tulagi. We're thinking, here it comes now, with the good news. And he says, the enemy, they're a tough fighting outfit. You saw them. You know what they're like. Well, there's a long road ahead of us. So don't any of you get any thoughts about thinking you're going elsewhere. You're going to stay right here till we take care of the Japanese here. Well, morale went down that fast. But he was right. We had just started the road back.
Within weeks, Guidone, now promoted to sergeant, and the rest of the 1st Marine Raider Battalion landed on Guadalcanal to reinforce Marines already fighting on the island.
They did manage to assign us to a mission that we were trained for, and that was to make a raid. Just down the coast, there was a village called Tasimboko, which was occupied by the Japanese. General Kawaguchi had a brigade there, and he was moving toward our perimeter with the bulk of his men. He left a rear echelon back here at Tasimboko. It was decided we would make a raid on that. So we had 2 companies that embarked. The company I was with, one company went on APD, and the others were split up on something like trawlers, small wooden boats, that's all they had. And man, the trawlers would rock like that, and the water would swish in there, we'd be all wet. And so at dawn, we went in and landed. And that morning, before we landed, a couple transports came in that were coming in, were behind us. And the Japanese thought that was an invasion force. There were Japanese who were at Tasimboko, and they hauled out of there. They left and, to move up toward the line toward General Kawaguchi's place. So, and it wasn't, the transport had nothing to do with us, but it's a good thing it happened. So we had no opposition there. So we just went ahead and just destroyed supplies, their clothing, their medicine. We just had a ball. And he'd lost all the supplies back in the rear echelon while he was up there getting ready to make that attack on the Bloody Ridge battle. So it hurt him.
Relocated off the beach, Guidone's company was tasked with establishing a defensive line along a rocky inland ridge.
We had a bivouac area that was right behind the ridge line where we had our pup tents and all our clothing and things like that, gear. Edson wanted to run a patrol toward the Japanese to see where they were located and get an idea how far away they were. So they picked a reinforced platoon, and our platoon leader, who was Cliff McLaughlin, he said they want 1 sergeant to go, and there's 2. I got 2 sergeant platoons, so whichever one of you want to go can go. So me and his name was Flater, we flipped a coin, and I lost, so I got to go with the patrol. And Flater was going to stay back in the bivouac area as security. So cut down, we moved out on the patrol, and we went out quite a ways until we got to the point where we could hear the Japanese chopping brush and talking, the point was getting close. And just as the point got up, the firing broke out, and then we all halted in the column and waited, because we weren't going to deploy, we were going to pull back. The mission was just to see where they were. At the same time, the bombers came over for their noon raid, and they started dropping these bombs on the ridge. And of course, they came down toward us, and they were bombing the Japanese and us both. And I remember hitting behind a banyan tree with one of the squad members. His name was Naboski. And the bombs were coming in pattern, and finally it stopped, I think about 500 yards from us. That just picked us up and threw debris all over us, both of us. And I looked over, and Ski's on the ground. He has his rosaries out. He's saying his prayers, and it must have worked. So we pulled the platoon, and we went back to the bivouac area, and our bivouac area was in shambles, and the bombs had hit right in the area. And the sergeant that won the toss was killed by concussion. That was the beginning of the Battle of the Ridge. And the next day, we sent A Company in to counterattack the Japanese, and we moved in on them, and we got as far as we could get, and they stopped us cold. They had too much fire. And I was up there with my squad at the time. We started pulling back. We got word to pull back. So I sent some of my men back in groups of 2 and 3. And just before I got ready to move back, I heard somebody say, "Marine." And I says, "Wait a minute." I said, "Did you hear that?" He said, "Yeah, but we knew the Japanese were always pulling tricks like that." So wait a minute. He says, "Marine." So then we kept looking. We were in prone because you couldn't get up because the Japanese would fire, and they just firing right over our head as we were laying prone. And then I saw this figure up there had utilities, and I said, "That's a Marine up there." So we scooted up there, and he had been shot across both legs, and he had a cartridge belt tied around his legs. And he says, "Get me out of here." He said, "I've been here all night. The Japanese have been walking all over me." So we started dragging him out of there, and we got him back. And then the company commander ordered some mortar fire there, but I never saw that Marine again.
Frank Guidone continued fighting in the Solomon Islands into 1943, including time scouting behind enemy lines on New Georgia. By the time he was rotated home, he had made the rare jump from enlisted man to officer, but it's his time with the Raiders that he prizes most.
The 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, when the issue was in doubt that the Japanese might overtake us, and we were being shelled, and we were being bombed, we were being strafed. It never happened again after that. Every campaign after that, there was no doubt who was going to win. You know what I mean? And so I felt that we were in the right place at the right time, and we did the same job as the division did. And that Guadalcanal can be responsible. We did at Guadalcanal can be responsible for turning that war into an offensive war instead of a defensive war. From then on, it was a matter of just taking island by island, taking up, and those guys did it. Well, I'm proud to have been a Raider, because I think that we did a job when it had to be done.
That was Captain Frank Guidone. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for watching, and by doing so, honoring those who've served. This program was produced by Evergreen Podcasts and Documentary.tv. I'm your host, Ken Harbaugh. If you've enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe below.